Hi there, my name is Mike Kiniry. I'm a radio host and producer here at WGCU Public Media. I'm here with three guests today to talk about some of the issues around climate change and the way it impacts the world around us, brought forth by the film The Urgency of Now, Impacts of Climate Change on Southwest Florida. As you all know, this is part of Florida Climate Week. It's presented by the VoLo Foundation, so thanks to everybody for joining us. I'm joined this morning by the film's producer and director, KC Schulberg. He's a filmmaker and also a longtime climate activist and advocate who was until fairly recently Collier County Waterkeeper. KC, welcome.
Thank you, Mike.
And Dr. Mike Savarese is a professor in the Department of Marine and Earth Sciences at Florida Gulf Coast University. Dr. Savarese, thanks to you.
Thanks to you too, Mike.
And last but not least, my colleague Tom Bayles down at the end of the table. He's senior environmental reporter here at WGCU. He's covered environmental stories in Florida for a combined 20 years of a 33-year career in journalism. Tom Bayles, nice to see you.
How you doing, Mike?
Casey, let's start with you. Explain who the target audience of this documentary is and kind of how it came to be.
Well, we decided that we would project this audience basically toward people who were already fairly knowledgeable about climate change. So we were not dealing with the great unwashed. So we made those assumptions and we kind of crafted the movie that way. It came about because there was a steering committee that wanted to create an event. It was for a water summit. It's supposed to be October 6th. Well, that didn't happen. That was 9 days after Hurricane Ian. And they wanted to create a little opening movie for the water summit. So it was originally 11 minutes long. That climate summit actually happened January 17th. The movie played well. Then there was interest in expanding it, so we just kind of expanded it to the 26-minute version that we now have available, and that enabled us to include information about Hurricane Ian. So we went back, grabbed more interviews, expanded the movie a little bit. And
we will get to Hurricane Ian, I'm sure. Just tell us a bit about your background when it comes to climate activism and advocacy.
Well, I was the executive director of Colusa Waterkeeper for 3 years, and I have been on this climate change issue for a long time. Colusa's primary focus was really water quality more than climate change. When I became the Collier County Waterkeeper in October of 2018, I shoved that to the top of our priority list because I think it's just existential, and we who have the gift, which we may consider a curse of knowledge about the true impacts of climate change, have to get the word out. We have to be the clarion callers, and we have to go from basically flatlining, which we are right now, to a bell curve. And so it's our job to start to mobilize people and try to influence people and try to get some critical mass going, because we're way behind the 8 ball. We're really behind.
We just experienced Ian just almost a year ago now. It was the most severe storm that we've ever ever experienced here in Southwest Florida on record. There was 10-foot plus water covering our barrier islands. Everyone here was affected. Everyone in this room, everybody in Southwest Florida was affected. Dr. Savarese, FGCU's water school, tell us just a little bit about it for people who aren't from here and don't understand what the scope of it is, what it's all about. But how much of it is focused on these issues around climate? Is it a lot? Is it some?
Okay, yeah, thanks. I mean, the water school is essentially a college within the university, within Florida Gulf Coast University, and it brings together people from all disciplines to focus on water-related problems. So the science of water-related problems and then the management and policy aftermath of that particular science. And the water school kind of focuses on a variety of water issues. The two that are most impactful here in Southwest Florida would be climate change, which is an aspect of the water school that I'm involved with, and then harmful algal blooms are probably our two biggest applications. And the water school, it's principally about providing training for our students and to provide resources to our faculty be involved, but it also includes a significant community outreach approach. So what the water school is trying to do is it's trying to bring science to management, science to policy, so that governments, community groups can deal with their problems more effectively. And we've done a pretty good job of bringing that climate science message out into our regional world.
The reason I teed it up with Ian and then asked about the water school is you're in this documentary, and I want to play a clip from it where you actually talk about some of the science that's been done and how what happened with Hurricane Ian in a sense, allowed us to sort of verify that some of the models are correct. So let's watch
Beyond
that.
those levels.
We can see on the landscape as we move forward into the future where storm surge on top of sea level rise is likely to occur. And the maps are showing you those kinds of scenarios. The colors represent the extent and depth of flooding as we move forward into the future. The hotter the colors, the deeper the inundation. So we've replayed Ian's track and characteristics through that model, and that model then produced some pattern of storm surge and flooding depth around the Southwest Florida landscape. And you can compare what nature dealt us against what the model hindcasted, and the match was remarkable. So this tool that we now have in our hands here in Southwest Florida can be quite valuable in predicting, again, the impact of future storms with respect to surge and flooding.
You know, we've dealt with some serious blue-green algae issues here in Southwest Florida, and when I bring on Dr. Mike Parsons, he talks about the good news, bad news story of being able to do great research because horrible things happen. And that's the same thing that's happening here. You're able to verify a model of something super serious because something super serious happened, right?
Right. Yeah, models are only as, you heard the saying, models are only as good as the data that go into them. And the way you test models is you let history be your guide. So you have a model, an event occurs, the event provides some empirical data, some real data as to how water behaves across the landscape, and then you can compare that against what the model would have predicted if the model could tell the future. And if the comparison is good, that validates the model and gives you greater confidence in the model. So the irony here, the same irony that Mike Parsons deals with every day, is that you have to hope for an event that allows you then to validate the model. Ian and now Idalia, having just made landfall a couple weeks ago in the Big Bend area, they were two different storms than Florida has experienced since 1960, at least Southwest Florida. Those were really the first storms within recent history, within institutional memory, where storm surge was a serious impact. And that's really the factor that most climate science people are worried about, and most emergency managers, decision makers aren't conscious of because we haven't experienced it before. So it was really a strange 2 years, Ian and now Idalia a year later, to have two storms to produce storm surge on the Gulf Coast of Florida, where we haven't experienced that with any great frequency.
I grew up here, and the conventional wisdom was we're not susceptible to storm surge because there really hasn't been a major storm surge event like you said. But in researching since Ian, we are super susceptible to storm surge here in Southwest Florida. It's just been a fluke of nature that we haven't been hit by a storm like that for as long as it was.
Irma was the anomaly, really.
Right.
Everyone expected it, and it never materialized.
Right.
And people became complacent. Well, people aren't so complacent anymore.
I think that was a psychological bruise our region had to deal with, the fact that Irma didn't generate surge, and I think it just bolstered this preconception that we're invincible with respect to surge, and that's clearly not the case.
The film also talks about how the scope of the problem is what can cause people to, in a sense, freeze up, because there's so many issues. We're starting to really see them in a way that, it's not just people saying, oh, it's going to happen, but it's like, oh, another town burned down. Oh, there's a heat dome over Canada in the winter. I mean, things like that. I want to play another clip from the film where they talk about, we as individuals and our tendency to freeze up. So let's play that now.
Much of what we experience on the day-to-day regarding climate change, we don't connect our actions to their impact very well. We drive around in cars, we fly around in planes. All of those things are part of our daily lives, and people really feel like their hands are tied in a lot of ways and that they can't affect change because, frankly, our world is now built with fossil fuels in mind. They relieve themselves of the responsibility in a way, because what can I do in a world that's built for fossil fuel?
That phrase, built for fossil fuels, really struck a chord with me, Casey. We've all benefited, just like Ian impacted everyone. We've all benefited from the abundance that is fossil fuels. And with the issues being so manifold, how do we Like, I know that's the million-dollar question, but how do we address that when it seems too big to address and we all benefit from what's causing harm?
Yeah. Well, we need to have a paradigm shift, and that's always tough to shove through a society. So it's going to take these alerts, which we're getting from the natural ecosystem. They're giving us warning signs, and it's going to take us working on the other side, and those who are activists and scientists and educators bringing the word out and basically trying to make this a part of everyone's daily life. Everyone's busy, they take their kids to school, they go get shopping. You know, you can't always have climate change front of mind. But if we don't start addressing this, it will be such a catastrophic impact on our daily lives that we really need to start getting people to engage on a daily basis. Try to do something, try to think about it once a day, at least for a moment. Just try to think about it. How can you change your life? How can you get the word out? How can you interact with other people? What can you do every single day?
Tom Bayles, what are the challenges as an environmental reporter to try to get a message out in a way that makes people consider things truly in a way that might affect change?
I was thinking, I occasionally give talks to community groups, and inevitably that question comes up: what can I do? What can I do? And the answers are so uncomfortable that the room shifts from people willing to tackle the problem in their own way to, I'm not going to make a difference. Because the way you can make a difference is, for example, don't buy food that you're not going to eat, so there's less agriculture, so there's less farming, so that there's less greenhouse emissions, carpool, all these things that we can do on an individual day-to-day basis change the way that we would normally do our lives and go about our day-to-day. And somewhere in there, between that question being asked in a discussion I'm having and the answer not being very palpable, somewhere in there, if we can figure that out, then we have a way to properly convey the message that, yes, you can do something on an individual level. It's that same thing as, when you have oil leaking from your car, you're like, I'm not going to get it repaired this week. I'll do it next week because it's just a little bit of oil, even though I know it's bad for the environment. But 1,000 people with a little bit of oil starts adding up, and it's the same with climate change. If you're not doing your part in little bits day to day, and nobody is, then we're not going to get anywhere.
I think that's the crux of the problem. David Orr called it a social trap. Other sociologists call it a wicked problem, a problem that has a clear and obvious solution, but the solution is not attractive given our culture, our social status, and we don't like the changes that were needed to make it happen. Clearly, we know we shouldn't be developing close to the coast, but how do you tell people who are already on the coast that they can't live there anymore? People are accustomed to traveling and ease of travel. How can you tell them that, they should rethink how they move around their neighborhood or move around the planet when they're on vacation? So I don't really think I have an answer for you. I think Tom, in some ways, in his answer, noted that the small changes, in other words, if you can get individuals to make minor changes in their behaviors, then you're slowly, perhaps too slowly, changing the culture, and you're bringing people around to accepting the paradigm shift that KC noted was required. So there needs to be that cultural shift, and that's that sort of whittling away of changing people's behaviors. Those small efforts by individuals do, in fact, add up. They're not inconsequential. Often people dismiss, carpooling because what difference does it make? I'm just one person. It does make a substantive difference. If the culture changes, and if those incremental changes do add up, and if people allow that cultural change to affect the way in which they vote, and change government so that government is more receptive to the kind of problem, then we're on our way to a solution. The question is, how long does that take? And as KC noted, this is an urgent problem. We don't necessarily have the time for that to happen naturally.
As I understand it, even if we were to basically stop emitting carbon right now, we would still have decades of furtherance of the impacts. Is it time to think more about mitigation, or is that not the right way to think about it?
Well, that's a real paradox, because you can either put your resources in adaptation or mitigation. And they're going to be vying with each other for resources. And every city and every county and every state and every federal government is going to have that same decision. Do we put money into protecting our citizens from the inevitable harm or should we try to treat the problem at the source? I've always been a proponent, because we're clean water people, treat the problem at the source, because it's cheaper to do that than to try to fix it on the back end. But we're in a pickle now, so we're going to have to do both. We're going to have to try to adapt, and we're going to have to try to reduce the carbon emissions.
Adaptation, I think, is easy or easier for society to deal with, and adaptation is on every decision maker's minds here in Southwest Florida, particularly in the aftermath of Ian. But at some point, adaptation doesn't work anymore. I mean, you can fortify the coast, you can use green infrastructure to make things a little bit better, but at some point, the storm impacts, the sea level rise impacts, the heat impacts are no longer going to be adaptable. And so mitigation has to be part of the process. When I was driving into the interview this morning, I was listening to WGCU. I'd like to say I carpooled in for the interview, but that would be a lie. When I drove into the interview this morning, there was a piece on an NPR about a petroleum company that's now investing in carbon capture.
I heard that piece.
And there are two ways to approach reduction of our carbon footprint. One is to reduce our emissions to zero and bring the concentration in the atmosphere down. The other way is to capture it. And I've always been a proponent of not ignoring one in hope of the other. In other words, hoping that something like a carbon capture strategy might solve the world's problems is an awful lot to bank on. Mm-hmm. And it really should be sort of a pluralistic approach where we are cutting our emissions hopefully down to zero, and then we've got carbon capture in our pocket to bring the current concentrations down.
KC and Mike, as we have events like Ian and things that impact us directly, it's one thing for at the federal level to battle out whether climate change is real and what are the broad scale policies. It's another thing for like a city council person to have to talk to their constituents whose home was just under 12 feet of water. Are local governments taking it more seriously these days than they might have in the past, from your perspective?
Well, I think devil will take the hindmost, and those who are naysayers will just be slower to the solution, and they'll pay a penalty. And we live in a capitalist society, so market forces drive a lot of our decisions. So there's two edges to that. On the one hand, insurance prices are going to be astronomical, and then you won't be able to get a mortgage. And ultimately, people will say, well, maybe I'm not going to buy that house on the beach. No, I'll have to retrench. And that's happening. It's happening to a very marginal extent. But if we get another storm like Ian in the next 5 years, which I think is utterly predictable, then it'll just accelerate. So that bell curve I was trying to get to, we're headed there. We're just not getting there fast enough. The other side of the technology and the capitalist syndrome is that there's a lot of technology coming down the pike, which can really create a lot of solutions. So as everyone kind of reorients and refocuses and realizes there are also opportunities here to salvage ourselves, and as major corporations and companies. I mean, COP26 pledged something like $17 billion to start to solve these problems. That was one of the things that came out of COP26. So we need to get public money to create a spark for private money to pile in. We should be putting more money in R&D. We should be putting money into DARPA, because DARPA can serve as a kind of incubator, and then the private sector takes the little grains of resource that DARPA or some public institution creates and profit from it. They create GPS, or they create new technologies. Carbon capture is an interesting example. We got to see whether the carbon emitted by creating that carbon capture, whether it's a net win. We don't know that yet, but I think there are solutions to be found in the private sector as well.
Dr. Savarese, is part of what the Water School does try to inform policymakers?
Yeah, we are available to provide the scientific foundation for policy decisions. So we're not telling governments what to do. We're just providing them with the foundational information. We've also served in a variety of instances as facilitators, people that can bring groups together to have conversations without imposing an agenda. So we're trying to approach this objectively. We're not telling governments what to do. We're just providing them with some guidance if that's something they desire. And you asked about local governments, whether or not they're paying attention. They are paying attention. When you look at we have, I think it's 13 formal jurisdictions within the 3 counties, Charlotte, Lee, and Collier. And all of those jurisdictions are paying attention to vulnerabilities and to adapting to those vulnerabilities to enhance their resilience. I mean, that's what you're hearing in the news since Ian, is building a community's resilience capacity. So that is happening. Are local governments talking about mitigation? Are the local governments developing practices that reduce their own carbon footprints? For the most part, no, throughout the region. That's going to require, again, I think, this cultural shift, this paradigm shift that we've been talking about. But they're clearly focused on the problems, the impacts of those problems, and how to reduce those impacts as we move forward in time. So that's encouraging.
I want to play another clip now from somebody who was in the documentary, KC. It's a member of the Naples City Council who brings up another issue. We're talking about the barrier islands, but there's more people in Southwest Florida that are impacted by this than just the barrier islands, and by that I mean wealth disparity. But let's watch this clip.
I think there's a lot to be learned from what happened with Hurricane Ian. It was the worst natural disaster that this area has ever experienced, and it's really a matter of are we willing to do the work to gather the information and to learn from it. So you want to have a resiliency plan that's fair and equitable to everybody, and we do have some neighborhoods in the city of Naples, and obviously there's plenty more in Collier County that are poorer, lower income. One here in Naples is River Park, which was badly flooded by the recent Hurricane Ian. And we want to try to do everything we can to make sure those neighborhoods continue to be sustainable for the people who live here.
Casey, is there an analogy here when it comes to the United States and the rest of the world?
Oh yeah. I mean, I was really adamant to make environmental justice, to stress that in the documentary, and we gave a couple minutes to a migrant farm worker suffering the impacts of heat. Everybody that works outside, which tend to be less privileged people, they're suffering disproportionately. And we can't, in our rush to find these solutions, be disregarding the needs and the value of our less privileged fellow citizens. We just can't do it. We have to keep making that a part of the overall solution. I was struck by, a friend of mine is the waterkeeper in Oklahoma, actually, the Grand Riverkeeper, and he's a member of the Abenaki Nation. And he's concerned in our rush to renewable energy and batteries, that we're going to rape and pillage for minerals, which are largely on native-owned territories. And he's worried about a whole new invasion of of native lands to draw the resources we need in our rush to find solutions. So we have to constantly check ourselves and say, are we doing this conscionably? Are we doing this responsibly? Are we doing this in a humane manner? We have to hurry, but we have to also consider the implications of that push, and we have to constantly check ourselves. Are we being responsible in this initiative?
Another person who's featured in your film is a younger person, and as we close out here, I just want to talk a little bit about the next generation. Like 2 generations before me, nobody really thought about this. 1 generation before me, they started Earth Day. It started to become something that people were thinking of. My generation grew up being told there's growing science that this is real. The generation behind me were grown up told this is real. And now the generation growing up is watching, stuff happen all the time that seems like really out of the ordinary, in line with what's been predicted. I don't want to be a naysayer or a doomsayer, I guess, but what is the next generation going to think, and is that going to be what it takes? Is there going to have to be a moment where something clicks for everybody? Casey?
Well, I do have a lot of faith in the younger generation. I've seen them up and at it. I mean, we went to Glasgow for the COP26 UN climate change conference, and the first Friday there were 30,000 people in the street. The next day there were 100,000 people in the street, and there were 100,000 people in most of the cities of Europe, and those were about 60% young people. So young people are up and at it, and they are mobilized, and they are not happy. They're not happy. They feel they've been given short shrift. And in the last COP, they were locked out. The COP that happened in Sharm el-Sheikh, basically, they wouldn't allow any civil society into that conference. It was a terrible shame. I'm worried about the one in the UAE next year. Similar economics, similar whatever. But the young people are going to be at the door. They're going to be at the gates. And I have a lot of faith that they will help get us where we need to go.
What do you think about that, Mike Savarese, in terms of, it's one thing to be told something's probably happening because scientists say it. It's another thing to look out your window and see it happening and have people tell you that scientists have been saying this for 50 years. Do you think that we're going to reach a point where it becomes obvious that we have to make a change?
Yeah, I'm pausing here because I'm thinking about my own personal situation. I have 2 relatively young adult children, a 25-year-old and a 23-year-old, and one's living at home with me, one's living in Boston. And when we were all living together, every night we would sit at the table and I would have to try to defend my generation's malfeasance to the generation that is going to feel or is already feeling the impact of how we've mismanaged the planet. I don't think this is an answer to your question.
Well, that's okay. We're freestyling.
But I think I view this as both a scientist and as a parent. Every parent, anybody that has a child, wants to leave to your child a better world than you acquired. Oftentimes, that's mostly hinged on economic well-being. Everybody wants their children to be better off financially than you were. But this is somewhat different. Sure, there are economic repercussions of climate change, and we're going to feel more of that as we move forward. But our children are getting a less habitable planet after us. And so that sense of urgency in this next generation is palpable and necessary and important and very understandable. Maybe the cultural change you're looking for hopefully will come from that generation as they mature and become more active in society.
We're wrapping up here, Tom Bayles, but do you have any final thoughts you want to leave us with, either in line with that or of your own?
I was thinking, Mike was talking about his kids. I have twin boys who are turning 18 shortly, and they have not known any controversy about whether there's climate change or not. They don't know that it was ever disputed. It just is, and they good-naturedly, I hope your kids too, give me a lot of ribbing about it. And they kind of throw their hands up. They're back to the beginning of the conversation. They are, what can I do? You know, Dad, what can I do that's going to make a difference? And why did you leave it for me this way? And I don't really have a good answer. This is such a big problem, and it's global, and there's a lot of the causes for this that are not in the United States that we can control. Of course, there's a lot that is too. And I think that next generation you're talking about is going to have, I do see them very involved. I consume a lot of news as I create some, and there are some terrific youth movements worldwide that are encouraging. I hope it's enough, and I hope it's soon enough to make a difference. And every summer, it doesn't wind up being like this or worse. That's my hope.
Casey, where can people see the film? Is it available publicly yet?
It is not. It's going through a little festival circuit, and this little half-hour movie has been officially selected for 7 film festivals. It's already won 3 awards, so it's going through a little bit of a festival process. We're going to do a premiere in Naples on the 28th of September, coming straight up, and that'll be the first time this movie is viewed by a small invited public. And then we'll figure out what how to get it out, because we want the widest number of people possible to see it.
All right, well, that's all the time we have, but thanks to everybody, KC Schulberg, Mike Savarese, and Tom Bayles.